I'm Andrew Willett for A Pro Basketball Show. Follow and subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, as well as following on social media at APBShow on Twitter and Instagram. Be sure to follow me as well at TheACWillett22. Thank you so much for tuning in, and without further ado, hello and welcome to A Pro Basketball Show. I am so excited now to be joined by Evin Gualberto. And Evan, he's a coach, and he's going to be the coach of this podcast here today. We're going to get into a lot of scheme stuff, as it's something I've been interested in as we've gone through the course of the season. And I've just liking what I'm seeing from Evan on Twitter. He's the co-host of the Step Through, assists with the basketball action dictionary, and he's the coach. So I'm so excited to be joining Evan to the show. Evan, how you doing? Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. Can't complain. It's always a good time talking about the W.
Yeah, well, we have really had a lot of basketball pass already. It's hard to believe that we have hit August, and I know we took some time to try and get this scheduled, but I'm so excited. Thankful to you for taking the time to join the show. But let's get right into it, because, like you said, you take in a lot of basketball, including the WNBA. How much time do you spend just like on any given day? How much time throughout the week do you spend taking in basketball?
I honestly can't say. So um, my significant other would probably say more than I should. But it's a lot between the YouTube channel that I've taken a little bit of time away from, to wanting to like throw up video breakdowns on Twitter, texting back and forth with like other coaches, or working on the basketball action dictionary some with shout out to my good friend at Bowser to Bowser, who runs it. And then casually watching, and then coaching, or like working guys out and doing film breakdown there. It's a lot. An unhealthy amount, I would say.
It's a lifestyle at this point like I like that you mentioned like not only the stuff that you're watching to break down, but also casually watching along with your coaching, and because it becomes a tough balance, I think, because when you're watching live, it almost has to be a casual watch for me, but when I go through and I'm trying to catch all the little details. It takes me a little while to sit down and just go through one basketball game. But what does that take for you to go through and kind of break down a basketball game?
So I used to when I had not necessarily more time, but time to prep for a game, um I would use a lot of use I've experimented with a lot of different programs, but basically anytime I'm watching a game now, is I'm catching it. And if especially if it's live, for me, it's past the point of like, ooh, like I want to clip that, or like I'll write it down and things like that. But for the most part, like I'll just record it myself, and then if I think it's worthwhile, I'll diagram it. I'll throw a couple of arrows on there, try to break it down for people, post it on
Hmm.
Twitter, or send it to my players and stuff like that. So like, as much as I want to say like it can be a casual watch for me, I just don't think I can turn it off at this point. I do enjoy basketball very much still, obviously, but whenever I'm watching something, I'm just like, the coaching brain doesn't turn off, or the teaching brain doesn't turn off, where I see it and I'm just like, should I post that? Is this worthwhile to do a thread on? Do I just keep this for myself, and so on?
Yeah, so I just when I got started the season, just trying to break down the W as much as I could. It was like close to 2 hours to get through a whole game. I'd be taking little notes. That my notes get a little now that I'm not taking nearly as many notes. But it's more so like I'm just trying to slow it down and break down all the little details while I'm noticing like development from different players, also trying to notice different sets and schemes from players. What are you noticing when you're watching a game?
It depends on what. Well, from a coaching standpoint, the very first thing I see is, oh, I like that action. Could I use it? Or, oh, okay, so this is a fun progression from the beginning of the season where they would only run X, and now they're flowing into reads and options. Or are they flowing into reads and options by choice, or is the other team taking something away because they saw that this team ran this at the beginning of the season now, and now they're building.
Hmm.
So it's as much that um, the main thing I guess I would say to people is just like, and I'm sure this is not, I'm not treading any new ground here, but if you're watching to learn basketball, to learn how to watch basketball, don't watch the ball because
Hmm.
obviously the ball is one of 10 players out there. The ball is in the hands of one of 10 players out there. So if you're watching everything else, you're seeing all these little things. Like that's when you start to learn a little more. And then, don't try to do too much in any given game. Just see what catches your eye and things will naturally go from there.
Hmm. Okay, okay. So I know just like as a listener here of the Dunker Spot, I've heard Steve Jones Jr. and Matthias Duncan talk about just different things here and there. Where like for me, when I started this year, it was like I want to try and see what the defenses are doing. How are they treating different players? Are they like, for instance, a Chelsea Plum? When I'm watching that, it's like, hey, the defense is all over her all the time. We are seeing a lot of traps, a lot of two to the ball, where it's a different pitch and roll coverage for, say, a Chelsea Gray or a Jackie Young, although they are both really strong shooters as well. But like, and so that's what I started to notice. And like I said, as a listener of the Dunker Spot, they start to point out different things like there's an empty corner over here on the offense. Why would they be doing that? So I guess from your perspective, you're obviously seeing a set, but what catches your eye, and how have you kind of progressed in that sense from at the start, what caught your eye versus what's catching your eye recently?
Oof. Well, I mean, if we're talking about what like the my growth as like a basketball viewer,
Yeah.
it's mostly just the spacing. The spacing of it
Mm,
all is it makes it so much easier. Um, Professional leagues, right? Especially when there's a defensive 3 second call. Specifically meaning, if a defensive player cannot stay in the paint while an offensive player isn't an arm's length away. That is so different from, let's say, college, certain overseas basketball, and the high school level, because the lane is so much more clear, and the lane being clear, more room to attack. You see players time it out. You see offenses um, gear up to manipulate the tagger. The tagger is, so if we're talking about a pick and roll, it's the help defender that's meant to bump, obstruct, whatever you want to, the big rolling, right? So it's mostly the manipulation of the tagger. If there's a pick and roll, I'm not really watching. I am sort of watching like what they're doing to the ball. So it's either two to the ball. I'm apologize for throwing a lot of terms out there, but like there it's a hard hedge, it's an ice switch, up to touch, a drop, whatever it is. But what's happening with the help side defender to take away that? Because
mm.
for the most part, a pick and roll isn't just 2-on-2, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that's really interesting for me who like I just getting started in this space of trying to break down. It is a lot of like I'm watching how they're treating the basketball, and that's interesting to hear you say more so the tagger. I like that. And you've already given some good advice here for what to pay attention to from the start. So let's get into the WNBA season at this point, because like I said, we are nearly 25 and up, 25 games in, and a few teams have played more. And obviously the Aces already with I believe 14 games left in their season, clinching a playoff spot. We've had a lot of yeah, pretty crazy like that. But a lot of basketball has gone down. So kind of what's caught your eye in this WNBA season to this point?
Uh, I mean, the biggest thing is obviously, well, at over at the step through, we started 2 years ago. Um, we started covering the W 2 years ago, and that was the I believe it was Bill Lambier's final year in Vegas. The Chicago Sky had won the championship, and it was just this thing of like the different Sandy Brondello was with the Phoenix Mercury, and they were in the finals. So the following year is all of these coaching moves. And so I think the very first episode we ever did of the step through, I was watching Kurt Miller's Connecticut Sun with Jonquel Jones, right? And I was learning all of their plays, and I was obsessed with their playbook because they were so methodical with how they did everything. And it's just the new faces in new places thing, not just with the players but with the coaches. Is like I loved watching James Wade and Candace Parker and Emma Meeseman with the Chicago Sky, and all three of those entities are no longer there, right? And so I'm watching Candace. Oh, well, you can't really watch Candace at this particular moment because she's like not healthy, but um, her fit with the Aces, and obviously what Becky Hammond's done in the 2 years she's been with the Aces, what Sandy Brondello's doing with the super team in New York, and Kurt Miller in LA and stuff like that. So I'm watching all these different coaches, and especially the new coaches who I've never seen before. The Connecticut Sun, like I said, the very first episode we ever did, the 5 out spacing they've taken, and obviously what Alyssa Thomas is doing at a historic level. So all of these, there's so many different things that catch my eye game to game, day to day, that I mean, it's hard to nail down one.
Yeah, yeah. So you're like from your standpoint, like noticing all the little things, almost a little bit harder to see or to like nail down some bigger picture topics. But I think you really hit on a lot of them from this season, which is a lot of movement. I mean, you mentioned Kurt Miller and John Quill Jones in Connecticut now with the Sparks and New York, respectively, and Sandy Brondello when she was with Phoenix, now in New York, like you mentioned. So I think that's a really interesting thing to note, as we're going to get into several of the teams here today. Obviously, two of the more pressing teams. It is the Aces and New York. So why not start there with the Aces? I just mentioned they clinch a playoff spot. Still 14 games left in the season. 14 games left in a 40 game season, and they are already guaranteed for the playoffs. What's caught your eye there for the Las Vegas Aces?
I mean, there is no answer to the Aces. I feel like in their the
Yeah,
so in coaching specifically, but in basketball, it's what are you willing to live with is how I always approach it, and what I always tell my players, the other coaches, and what I look for in a game specifically is like, what are you willing to live with? Because you can take certain things away,
hmm.
but after a certain point, like you can't take everything away, because if you try to take everything away, you end up giving up everything because you can't do everything well. You just can't. It's just impossible, right? So if you put two on the ball, in a Chelsea Gray, Asia Wilson pick and roll, Chelsea Gray is gonna tear you apart with her passing. If you play Chelsea single coverage, she'll get to her mid range, she'll kill you. It's just that simple, and that's why she's so good. But Jackie Young, like I said, over the course of the 3 years I've been covering the WNBA like full time, is or as close to full time as you can get it, is Jackie Young's improvement as a shooter. Kelsey Plum's growth as not just a scorer but as a defender. Asia Wilson being like the ultimate cheat code type of player with Defensive Player of the Year, MVP, just an absolute monster. And I think, the added weapon of the 3-point shooting. And I think what largely goes, not to say that Asia Wilson is not talked about enough, although I do think she's not talked about quite enough. Her passing is terrific, and the
Hmm.
growth in the chemistry between her and the Aces core. It's just the way they move the ball is you you marvel at the ball movement, but like as a coach, like I'm watching it and I'm just like, what do you do? What do you do at that point? Because you take away Jackie Young, the threat of the Jackie Young drive, she'll kill you from the outside. You take away Kelsey, and her pet move at this point is the pump rip through, and then as you're off balance because you're leaning in and trying not to foul, she'll pull up and hit that shot off of 1 foot. And then you add an Alicia Clark and a Candace Parker, and there's so many different things that you see with the Aces every single night. But I think the biggest thing for me is how they weaponize every single player. Like
Hmm.
Kelsey Plum is, like I said, a growing defender, but she is downright nasty when it comes to like being a screen setter, especially as a small guard. Like that's everything you want. In a small guard that can shoot and has gravity. Because when you have gravity, obviously the defense is worried about you at all times, and they'll play up on you to take away your shots. You watch an Aces game. Watch Kelsey Plum hit a defensive player on a screen, and whether it's off ball or on ball, she can do it any type of way. She can hit you hard, or she can ghost it, which means not really setting the screen and pop out to the perimeter, or she can slip it, and she's such a threat that no matter what you do, you can't take everything away. So that's what makes the Aces so dangerous. And Jackie Young can do it too, and Chelsea Gray can do it. Like everything it all works. And they've only lost 2 games on the season, so that's how it works.
That'll do it. Yeah, currently on an 8 game winning streak. And that's been my thing, Evan, this whole season where I was like, well, you can stop or like slow down, or even if 2 players, 3 players having an off night that night, Aces they still might be fine. With the 5 All-Stars in that starting lineup. I am curious though, Candace Parker, you mentioned not playing right now, gone down with an injury. What does that like change for the Aces formula at this point?
Well, I think they become a little more. Well, I think it's you would say a player of Candace Parker's caliber. You take that away, obviously there's a bit of a drop off. But when you factor in, and again, I'm not breaking any ground here, when you factor in the fact that they won the championship last year without her, I don't know that it necessarily matters. You know what I mean? Not
Hmm.
not, not to say that Candace Parker doesn't matter in this sense, but they're still so dangerous. It's just you add Candace Parker and they become more dangerous. That's all it is.
What a wild world we live in to be able to say
So
that
yeah.
with Candace Parker. Yeah, I mean you have Alicia Clark there. You've got Kia Stokes. You can play a few different ways. Playing a little bit more dangerous is an interesting way to put that, I think, because Candace Parker as a basketball player, especially I think once playoff time reaches, can just do so much out there on the court. But with the Aces, like you mentioned, they've got all of those different pieces that do so much for that team already that maybe they aren't even asking as much from Candace Parker as any other team in the league would be asking of a player of that caliber. I did want to ask you about their defense a little bit because not only have they been best team in the W, best offense, but they do have the number 1 defense this year as well, I believe. And that's I feel like we've only seen it grow since Becky Hammond missed a couple of games early in the season. You were able to pair Candace Parker with last year's Defensive Player of the Year and Asia Wilson. Defensively, what do they run a lot schematically, and what do you like from their defense?
Ooh, well, I mean, they change it up on you so much. Is
Mm,
The fun thing about Becky Hammon is like I was wondering what her particular style would be. in her first year coaching last year. And like I broke it down, like she isn't afraid to switch it up. We saw, obviously the ball screen coverage is they switch it up between, being an out and out trap on the ball screen to playing down, and just trusting Asia Wilson or Kia Stokes to be the defensive anchor in against a penetrating guard. They played a 3-2 zone. They played a 2-3 zone. They have at times dabbled with a triangle and two, a box and one. And I heard Natalie Nakase, I hope I'm saying that right. I apologize if I messed it on Slapping Glass. She talked about how the Aces game plan at times was to just take what you want to do away. Make an opposing player a hungry scorer, with the different looks they were giving. Specifically meaning like, or my interpretation of this is like a box and one is when the Aces throw a box and one at Candace Parker last year when she was on the Sky. She's such an offensive hub that, make zoning everybody else and playing one on her, specifically Dearica Hamby. At that point, Dearica Hamby face guarding Candace Parker. But when Candace Parker had to work to get the ball, she became more of a scorer, or she, the mindset was like, everybody else is playing zone. If you can beat Dearica Hamby one-on-one, then by all means, go for it. But the key to that is like she becomes a hungry scorer. She's no longer the passing threat, the offensive hub that I just talked about, and that takes them out of their game. You saw them do it with Jonquel Jones as well. Is like, if you can beat us 1-on-5 or 1-on-1, but we're basically icing everybody, we're freezing everybody else on your team out of the game, do it. Like, we don't think you can beat us, that way.
Yeah.
And so the identity and defensive style of the Aces isn't necessarily their one thing. This is their ball screen coverage. This is what they do. This is what they do. It's death by 1,000 cuts. They'll beat you any way they have to. And I think that's the biggest thing.
That's a beautiful thing to hear you talk about, and obviously a wonderful thing for the Aces. And I think that's kind of in my opinion, kind of the right way is to throw out a bunch of different schemes, see what works for this unit, and just the amount of talent on this Aces roster. I feel, and obviously it's been shown a lot of it works schematically for the Aces. That's interesting to hear you talk about. To move into the next team, the New York Liberty. That's my last question for the Aces. But we'll start there with New York. What have you liked from the Liberty? What because obviously it's a lot of new out over in New York. How have you seen them adapt from start of the season to now?
So I think the fun thing about Sandy Brondello is that if you follow the narrative, or certainly the narrative that I saw, was that she's not that great with this team. And that was at the beginning of the season where they kind of struggled. You had Courtney Vandersloot out for a little bit, Jonquel and Brianna Stewart out for a little bit. And, they're piecing things together. And obviously Maureen Johannes, she didn't come until she was available, right? But you're slowly piecing it together. But what I like about, a coach like Sandy Brondello and one of my favorite coaches, Cheryl Reeve, is that you look at their playbook at the beginning of the season, and they're running sets. But as the team becomes more comfortable, and I noticed this last night, whenever they played the Sparks, on the second time they played the Sparks in LA, it's less sets and more just progressions. And so so if viewers want to watch it back, there's a sequence that speaks to everything that I'm talking about here. Is Brianna Stewart gets called for an offensive foul when it looks like she's going to be setting a ball screen, and then she starts to cut instead, and she gets called for the offensive foul, but her argument there is that she wasn't setting a screen. She was going to dive to the basket. She was cutting. And so therefore it's no longer the rules of being legally set on a screen should not apply is because you're cutting instead of, so you're vacating that space to go to the basket as opposed to like obstructing a defensive player. And that's sort of it, right? Is you have Sabrina Ionescu, Courtney Vandersloot, Nigel Laney, right? And then you have the two bigs in former MVPs in Brianna and Jonquel. And they're running stuff, but they're not really running stuff. So like you progress to these two, you go through whatever action you're going to go through on the strong side, and then the defense shifts all the way that way, right? And then you swing the ball over, and it's, let's say, Sloot throwing the ball to Brianna Stewart on the opposite elbow, and then she cuts off of Stewie that way. And the defense is all shifted that way because of all the action they had just previously run. And now you're giving Brianna Stewart a one-on-one situation on a completely clear side, and like there's nothing you can do at that point. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and you bring up the two MVPs. How have you liked how they have incorporated Jonquel Jones a little more and since the All-Star break?
I think they've been more purposeful with
Hmm.
how they've done things, but like I said, where we're still not anywhere close, in my opinion, to where they are going to be. There's nowhere near a finished product, and that's what makes it so scary. Is that they're winning off of talent as opposed to togetherness. So
Still number two team in the W and very fascinating. Before we get to the next team, it is the matchup between New York and Las Vegas, of course, has been kind of the talk of the W. Why does Las Vegas give New York so much trouble, especially attacking their defense, as in New York's defense?
well, I mean, I think I don't necessarily think like New York is a little smaller, but there's so much power to their guards. Specifically, Chelsea Gray and Jackie Young are two players who you can literally run actions for out of the post. And I mean, historically, if you're a point guard or a smaller player, like you're not used to really defending in the post. And so what the aces do is they weaponize, like like I've already said, like Kelsey Plum is like she just has gravity for days, right? Jackie Young as an improving 3 point, well, not as an improving 3 point shooter, like as a finished product 3 point shooter, super dangerous. You can't leave her alone. Um, you take one thing away, and this is what you end up with. But this is a team that's been playing together a while, and they're used to switching it up. And what Becky Hammon has like done really well, and she's kind of playing her bench more and more now that they've clinched their playoff spot. And giving valuable reps to players who like might not play at all during the playoffs, but hey, maybe I can throw you in for here or there. She keeps her best players out on the floor basically all the time by playing zone, by extending their minutes, by not having them have as much defensive responsibility.
Hmm.
And so like does New York have the level of chemistry and togetherness both from an offensive and defensive standpoint that you would need to beat an Aces team that's been together for, you know? Because if
Yeah.
you're talking about it, Chelsea Gray is the newest addition, or of the four of them, Chelsea Gray is the latest addition. But Jackie, Asia, and Kelsey have been together a while, and so there's just an inherent like, there's something that when you have chemistry, you can just continue to build and build and build, and there's this unspoken thing of like she'll be here, hit this, throw this there, and then you add the genius of Chelsea and the passing of Candace and the defensive and 3 point threat of Alicia Clark, and Kia Stokes did what she did in the playoffs last year. So there's just there's a million different things they can do. Whereas this New York team, as good as they are individually, as good as they've shown to be throughout the course of the season, they're still growing, and they haven't figured each other out yet as much as the Aces have.
We talked about the two super teams, and we go just a little below that. And I've been curious about this team all season long. It was one that I discussed in the preseason, and it was just like, what is happening here? It looks really enticing, but there are also a lot of question marks, and that's the Dallas Wings. Dallas is a team, and I think that we've seen kind of the same thing to start this season, where they're in and above 500. Right, they had that 5 game winning streak that looked really strong. But I need an explanation from you, Evan, as in what is happening in Dallas? Can you explain the Dallas Wings to me?
Uh, I cannot now, nor have I been able to covering them. My good friend Sabrina Merchant and I have discussed many times on this step through our confusion with who the Wings are, but with under new coach Letitia Trammell, um, um, basically I don't know. It's hard to say because this is the healthiest Satu Sabli has ever been. But she's a capital S star. Um, and obviously you have Tierram Cowan and actually Kalani Brown, who the two of them both standing towering at 6'7" gave the Aces as much trouble as any team has given the Aces. The Wings being the first team to beat both the Liberty and the Aces. It's that is crazy. Crystal Dangerfield um picking up full court, at her size. I think she's listed about 5'5". I don't necessarily know if that's the actual height, but yeah, Crystal Dangerfield just like, is an engine. She makes stuff happen. Natasha Howard, former champion, defensive player of the year, stuff like there's so many different things that they can throw at you, so many different styles of play that I mean they beat you up inside, they beat you up inside, they beat you up inside. And they haven't really gone small, but the option of running Natasha Howard at the 5 and then just getting out and running, like that's always been in the back pocket. And I think it was more a factor last year than it has been this year. And all of that to say, like I've said all of that stuff, and I haven't once mentioned Arika Gumbawale yet.
Yes.
And her growth as a defensive presence, her greater willingness to argue less and do more, you know, that's helped propel them, I think, another level. And I was actually talking to Sabrina Merchant about this recently, is that Arika is not a finished product as a passer yet, but like I said, like using that word again, she weaponizes her scoring, and is a very, very fun to watch passer. If you know what you're not necessarily even if you know what you're looking for, but like if you watch her, she she threads the needle. Sometimes she makes a lot of stuff happen, and sometimes she holds the ball a little too long. But like, a player of that caliber, a scorer of that caliber, like you want the ball in her hands, and you want her to be able to make the mistakes instead of
Mhm.
worrying about, hey, she should get off of it because like, yeah, maybe the longer she has the ball, the margin of error goes like increases. But for the most part, like she's such a threat that you need her to have it.
No, Arike is a really dynamic player, like you mentioned as a scorer, but you mentioned like as a player who you want the ball to be in her hands more often than not. But I think really that Dallas probably gets a much better team result if she is going into some quicker decisions and operating. Like you said, she can do a lot of different things and is a really good passer. You've mentioned the defense stepping up. I've noticed more of the passing this year as well, compared to last year. But what do you think Dallas is at its peak, with how Enrique plays?
I think if Arike can adopt a point 0.5 mentality, so a
Hmm.
half a second to as soon as she catches, she already knows what she's going to do with it, because she should already know, because the defense is so keyed in on her that her decision should be based not necessarily based on what the defense is giving her, but what she can do to the defense. Because if you manipulate it enough, like most of their action is to run it so that a Tierra McCowan and Natasha Howard, a Kalani Brown, like they end up with great post position and everybody else is lifted. So if the ball gets, if you know the opening is there and you know that there's somebody chasing behind you on a screen and you can just like stop, by the time you catch, like a player of Arike's caliber should be should be bending the defenses all out of shape with her decision making and her off ball movement as much as she does currently with her on ball stuff, her step back, the amount of separation she can create, unreal. But there are times when like maybe you don't have to take that dribble.
Mm.
Maybe you can just rise up to catch and shoot. Maybe you can turn and work on that stuff. I'm not saying she doesn't work on that stuff. I just mean literally like the decision making, it could come a lot faster, and that's so scary for the league, because for the longest time she's been this singular force driving the Wings forward offensively, and then like what do you do when she's not on there? What do you do if her shot's not falling? Now she's starting to grow and hit you with like all of these different things. And like I mentioned, Satu is a capital S star, and when the ball is in her hands, like so I can imagine them inverting a lot of action too, with like Arike being the
Ooh.
screen setter and Satu coming off. That I think we're a ways away from there, but like Satu and Arike could, mirror sort of what the Plum Asia duo looks like, or like grew into, I think.
Mm. I love to hear that comparison, but like you said, Satu is awesome. You're not going to find many fans who don't believe in her, and you're not going to find many fans who believe in her more than me, because I am a big Satu believer on everything, and it's coming through, like you said, with this being her healthiest season to date. I was also curious, like aside from kind of those two stars, you mentioned a lot of other depth, especially down low, with Kalani Brown, Tierra McCowan, Satu, and Natasha Howard as just like another incredible name to have down there. But where do you think this team's like best style of play comes through? Because you mentioned playing small potentially with Natasha Howard at the five. I'm not sure you have enough wins to do like a Satu at the five, but you've also seen them play with the double bids with both Kalani Brown and Tierra McCowan down low. So where do you think? Is it somewhere in the middle? Where are they best?
I think, like I was saying earlier, it's about um making your mind up as to like what you're willing to live with as a defense. So like
Hmm.
why not try to beat teams up inside? Because that's the one thing that Dallas can't. If you can do it against the Aces, chances are you can do it against anybody, right? That's the one thing in the 3 games that I saw is, yeah, they ran opportunistically. They did make the Aces turn the ball over some, but and they can get out and run because they're so athletic. But like there is no answer to, at times when Tierra McCowan gets her shot blocked, she goes right back up and puts it back in if you don't box her out. It's the quick, like you almost miss it to go get it, tip it back in, right? But that's the threat, is like I'm not saying fully lean into that, but like make teams adapt to one thing and then build out from there. Because Arike and Satu, Crystal, they're so dangerous, like doing all of these different things as well. But like you gotta make a team adjust to you, right?
Hmm.
You have to hit first, so to speak. So, if Arike misses a shot and you have these big bigs down there, then yeah, you can clean up on the offensive glass, but leverage what you have to get what you want, as opposed to just trying to. So that's why for me the biggest thing is the quicker Arike makes her decisions, the more the defense has to shift to her. And then the high-low passing gets more unlocked because Natasha Howard and Satu are great at flashing to the elbow to nail the high post and then throwing the ball in over the top on a seal, right? So like you get more of that, you know, sky's the limit.
Gosh, this is Dallas team, man. Like I love the optionality. We mentioned it. We just talked about it. You talked about where the ceiling is. It's very high, but there are also a lot of question marks. Well, like before the season, I was curious to select a Diamond to Shields. Where does fourth overall pick come into play? Actually, three top five picks all in a row. Where do they come into play at a certain point? But then at still, there's still so much talent, especially down low, like you said, where if they figure a few of those things out, Arike figures something out. Yeah, this Dallas team has been on my mind all season long. We'll go now to another team which has been on my mind, but not at full health, unfortunately, and that is the Washington Mystics, where I see a lot of potential with this group. I don't obviously right now at not full strength, things are not going well. But for the sake of this conversation, I want to talk about this team as if by late in the season they are at full health. Shakira Austin is back, Elena Deladon, Ariel Atkins. Gosh, you could that's a lot of starters to be without right now. But for the sake of this conversation, there have still been question marks about this team. We know that their defense is awesome. The offense, though, has been the main question mark. So I'm curious, kind of from your standpoint as a coach, schematically, what are the weaknesses for this Washington Mystics team?
Well, I mean, well, when you think about Ariel Atkins, right? You're talking about an Olympian, an all-star, just and a certified bucket, basically. Shakira Austin, Elena Deladon. When you with those three alone is, I mean, obviously it's huge, but you're talking also about the health of like Queen Ebro has struggled with health at times. Basically, everybody on this roster has struggled with health at times. Um, but at their core, they are, I still think, like, you know, a championship core. And so,
Mhm.
like, if fully healthy, they could pose the biggest threat to any team, any true contender. It would just be unfortunate for like whichever team gets matched up against them as a high seed. And you know, if assuming the Mystics even make the playoffs at this point, given that like I think this is their first time this late in the season under 500 in like forever.
Wow.
Um,
They do get
uh,
a little bit of a break in the schedule, though, fortunately.
yes. Yeah, thankfully. And so like for the longest time, you know, Mike Tebow was like, I think you know, there was some sort of tweet where, you know, a lot of people didn't go to the bubble in 2020, but it was just like these players you hadn't really heard of. And I think one of the ones that like really stuck in my mind was like you give um Mike Tebow like two good offensive players and like three like mannequins or whatever, and he could make like a top five offense. And for the longest time, that was it, right? But you know, now with Eric Tebow, it's like they have a they have a great defensive identity because Tasha Cloud and Brittany Sykes are just like are monsters defensively. And they're big guards. That you know and they're fast and they work and their work rate is so high and you know
Hmm.
going what's it called it's a windshield wiper game, right? They just want to run. And so if they can get healthy enough, like they've proven that defensively they can get it done. It's just offensively, do they have enough threats at this particular moment? um I think the answer has proven to be at you know with those three out, not really. They're not as potent as they need to be offensively, and the floor kind of shrinks then for Brittany Sykes and Tasha Cloud. So like that's where you lean into more is like if we can slow slow things down, if we can muck up the game enough on the defensive end, we could give ourselves the best chance to survive. But it kind of gets away from them offensively because they're just right now those two guards are a bit overburdened. And Maisha Hines Allen, like, not to put any shade on her by any means. It's just like when you take away a player as dynamic as Shakira Austin, who I thought was going to make a leap from like great first year player to like star, and you take away the second side playmaking, the shooting, the scoring, and the defensive tenacity of an Ariel Atkins, like even without Elena Deladon, whose accolades need not be mentioned because she is just, even if you just
Top
add,
tier.
absolutely, even if you just add Ariel and Shakira, like that will take you so much further along, especially the offensive burden that the starting backcourt right now have been burdened with.
Well, and do you think, I guess, giving them that burden maybe helps them uh, find some offense outside of Elena Deladon when eventually she is able to come back and Shakira Austin, Ariel Atkins all are able to come back?
So I think the nice thing about, I mean, it's a coaching thing, but like obviously, it's it does sound like a cliche, but when the opportunity presents itself, you have to be ready for it. And so getting increased reps offensively, not to say that either of these two players, veterans, right? They need reps, but the ability to like do stuff when there's no space does sort of carry over when there is more space. And so what I'm used to, as somebody who, the Mystics are in my local team, right? I'm used to that ball popping. And when the ball is moving, the ball movement is crisp and it's closeout after closeout, attacking closeout here and there. And then it's an easy drop off at some point to somebody, or somebody's getting a wide open look. That's just not there right now. And even if you add just one more offensive player, then like it works a little better. And defensively, when you're talking about, so not to get like too into the weeds, but like one of the things you could see if you watch the Dream Mystics game back, the most recent one, I think it was on the 30th, is early on both teams were icing the ball screens, which basically means like the guard is trying to stop the ball handler from using the ball screen to go middle, and they're pushing them down the side. So you're basically splitting the court in half, right? And you're pushing them into a big that's in a sort of a drop, or lower into the, or inside the paint, or inside the 3-point line at least. The idea being, if you can push them down the sideline, you don't have to help as much, right? Like I said, as good as Queen Egbo, as good as May Shines On is, like as a big, they're not, they don't have the defensive versatility that, or size, because if you put them together, then like, yeah, you do have the defensive versatility, the movement ability, the size, the lateral quickness of a Shakira Austin. But if you have a Shakira Austin playing in that ice as the big dropping, then the guard will more than likely have to settle for a contested mid-range jumper, with Shakira being able to contest anyway. And as we saw last year, Shakira is a monster defensive player. So, just when, if she is able to come back healthy, when she is able to come back healthy, it's going to do so much more for the team. And like I said, Ariel, with her ability, not even her shot making, just the threat of her shooting. Like, you have to close out hard on Ariel, and that also means you can't help off of Ariel. And so just that little bit more space can do this team a lot more good.
I thought that example that you used was just poignant for why Shakira Austin can help so much. And I mean, you talked about the defense on this squad, just the individual defenders with adding a Brittany Sykes to, I don't think Ariel Atkins has ever missed an all defensive team in her career, along with Natasha Cloud, multi-time all defensive player, and the size and length of an Elena Deladon, who is not half bad herself. So, I the They are missing those players for sure. I think it's interesting to discuss like maybe that might help this Washington Mystics team. But okay, we'll move on here. We're gonna go with some more league-wide questions because we've touched on four teams that I wanted to. Um, we'll get into kind of defense really fascinates me, and I'm loving hearing you talk about it, Evan. But like what defenses do you see around the W that are most prominent this season?
Well, I would say, like I said, Atlanta is a team in particular that I've noticed that, Tanisha, like from the jump, she's iced ball screens, which, like as I explained before, is when you play a very specific brand of defense, right? It's not to say that like, you think it'll work against everybody, but when you play the specific brand of defense, then that means that, or specific screen coverage, ball screen coverage, it means that you are giving teams a certain type of shot diet. So if let's say a Natasha Cloud comes off a step up, or excuse me, not a step up, a side ball screen, um, right in like let's say in front of the bench, in that mid range, and she makes a pull up jumper from out there. You're willing to live with that more than you are points at the line, points in the paint,
Hmm.
things like that. Because when the defense collapses, obviously you're in help, and now you're in scramble. So I do like having a very specific type of coverage because not every team, like the Aces, are good enough to throw all these different looks at you, right? And I'm not saying that like Atlanta's not as talented because obviously if you're talking about Annalisa Gray, Ryan Howard, Cheyenne Parker, all that stuff, like they have so much length and athleticism that like they can do all these different things. But what I have enjoyed from specifically watching the Dream and any team that ices is that you are very specifically saying, hey, if you want to come in and take these shots, because at a certain point, like every basketball player gets tired, right? Physical fatigue, but I am a big believer as well in mental fatigue. And so like the more tired you are in a game, the less you want to make the right decisions necessarily. You just want to take the option that's in front of you. So you can kind of not saying you're tricking a team into because obviously the basketball professional basketball players are much smarter than this, but like let's say you had to chase a Ryan Howard around the court like for 20 seconds straight defensively. And then you have to come down, you run a ball screen, like and like the physicality of Alicia Gray is like pushing you, pushing you, pushing you. And you're like, okay, I don't want to fight to go use this ball screen. I'm just gonna go this way where there's an opening. Oh, there's Cheyenne Parker, like in there. Yeah, but if I stop right here, just one dribble inside the 3 point line and pull up, like she won't be able to block this shot, which I mean she's blocked a lot of jumpers, so don't get me wrong, that's not a given. But the mental fatigue is there. You take that shot, that's a win for the defense, even if you make it.
Hmm.
Because if you make it, now that sort of reinforces, hey, take it again, And so it's this thing that continues to build where your mental fatigue starts to turn into a disconnect, not a disconnectedness from oh, your teammates are resenting you. Not generally, but just like, we could have gotten a better shot that possession. Like, come on, work the ball a little more. No, I'm having to do all this work on defense. Like, let me take this shot. And so on and so forth. And, making players continue to make decisions throughout a game, they might be in the best shape possible. But like at a certain point, the mental fatigue will hit. And that's what I think like the Aces, the Seattle Storm, for the longest time, and the Chicago Sky, even when they break you, it's not a result of like, well, they went on this like 25-0 run to start the game. It's okay, we barely missed a shot, but they came down and they made a shot. Okay, well, we turned the ball over. Well, they didn't convert on this layup, but we came back. We didn't convert on this layup, and now Jewel Lloyd's hitting a three, and so on. So it's like like I said before, death by a thousand cuts. isn't
Hmm.
necessarily this one player beat you. It's okay. Well, I closed out to Kelsey Plum. She passed up the ball. I made Chelsea Gray pass up an open three. Jackie Young, like I chased her off the 3-point line, and now she's driving into the lane. Oh, she just dropped it off to Kia Stokes layup. But I worked so hard on defense, and that's the thing that sort of
Yeah.
happens where it's not the one thing that beats you, it's the accumulation, and that's what basketball is, and that's what I enjoy so much about it. It's not about the one choice. It's about the series of choices throughout the course of a game that ultimately impact you. So, obviously, of the fourth quarter matters more than the first quarter, but I always tell players it's like you sure you can't you can't win a game in the first quarter, but you can definitely lose it, right?
Hmm.
So a few turnovers in the first quarter, they score, you don't get the ball back, and now you're in the hole, and then it builds and it builds and it builds. So I don't know if I answered your question at all.
No, but that's fascinating to hear about though, with just kind of uh, like every little play is going to mean something, and kind of sticking to your game plan is going to eventually lead to success, especially when it comes to that defensive side. That was really interesting to hear you talk about death by a thousand cuts. It was
Yeah.
all right, all right. Well, I. I love how your mind is just like finding each of these little details that even not just physically the physicality, but the mental aspect of the game. That's like I said, fascinating. We'll get through to a couple more, including most sets. Which teams that you're watching, which coaches that you enjoy watching are running the most sets in the W these days?
Oof. I mean, that's hard to say because, like, it's if I'm picking out, yeah, I can name this action, but it's this action paired with this action. It's this action paired with this action, right? And so, like, I was just watching the like I said, the Liberty Sparks game, and like to me, let's see here. Like I had recorded a bunch of clips, and so like there are 17 clips in total of like stuff like I might have wanted to break down on Twitter,
Hmm,
or
yeah.
just like do a general video breakdown of like sets that were cool or sets that are recognized that work, and they were run for the most part through, right? And you sort of build a through line to like, okay, well, LA is um two on the ball every time Sabrina is on it, and she's making her give it up. And so like, what's the off ball stuff looking like? And so if you watch that game, Sabrina is getting two on the ball on a ball screen, whether it's Jonquel, Kayla Thornton, or Brianna Stewart setting the ball screen. It doesn't really matter because they're throwing two. And Sabrina is stepping through or pump faking and finding a gap and then creating the space. And when Marine was in the game, it would, for the most part, it would be a back cut. And then there's this one beautiful sequence where Sabrina's on the left side of the right side of the floor. She gets blitzed. She um, picks up her dribble and she pivots. And the Marine cuts back door from the right corner, right? And then Sabrina throws an absolute dot and she hits her right in stride as she's going to the basket. She goes up. And then Benaja is on a 45 the other way, from the opposite wing, and she's just diving straight in. And then, you know, even though Sabrina made this amazing read and play to get her the ball, Marine is dropping it off. She could have laid it up, but she's dropping it off to Benaja. And it's this thing where that's not necessarily a set, but it's a reaction to what the defense is doing. And so, like for the most part, like it's hard to say who runs the most sets, but I would say just from the perspective of like the Aces and Liberty run four pet actions that involve five or four players in any given action, and they will always get something out of it.
Hmm.
But it's not like not every team comes down and runs the flex offense and so on and so forth, and they just run it through progressions. But like there's so many different things. And then like even me who's coached like for over a decade in high school basketball, and like I've been doing like NBA, WNBA, college basketball on both sides breakdowns for like a super long time. Like I never know if something is intentional or well, I mean I can guess, but I can never be sure if something is pre-rehearsed or that's just a read they made because the defense was a step behind, or they adjusted and switched the angle and so on and so forth. So like, I want to have an answer to your question, but I don't.
All right, well then maybe this one might be better. Who do you steal sets from the most? I guess like, or is it just all around that you are finding little different plays?
I mean, it depends on the year, I would say. I adjust my playbook to my personnel. Um, and so like if there's a player who, not necessarily saying that there is a player who I've ever coached who's been a Brianna Stewart, but if there is a taller post player who has guard level skill, then like maybe I'll have them watch Stewie and we can mirror some of those actions. For the most
Hmm.
part, not necessarily saying that. So, easy answer to your question when I first got started, it was James Wade and Cheryl Reeve. Like I would steal a whole bunch from them. But basically everybody steals everything from everybody else anyway, right? So like
Yeah.
I mean, the triangle offense is never run in its entirety, but there are pieces of the triangle offense all throughout the league. Tara Vanderveer has been so successful at Stanford running the Princeton offense, and there's so many progressions of the Princeton um, in the league right now. Like Cheryl Reeve has run genius stuff before, but I think I've detailed this in a Twitter thread. The most effective set they have is, let's say it's Dorka Juhas, Kayla McBride, and Nafisa Collier. Um, Two of them are at the elbow. Fee is at the top of the key, right? She throws the ball into Dorka at the left elbow, and then she goes to screen for Kayla McBride at the right elbow. Now, the two options you can have there, if the shooters are both in the corners, are Kayla can either curl the top side, go over Nafisa's screen, and then curl to the basket where Dorka can probably hit her, right? Or let's say it's a Jess Shepard because she's a much more fun passer. Although I am a fan of Dorka. Jess Shepard can thread that needle anywhere you want it. If two go, follow Kayla because there's great gravity. Fee can duck in and she's wide open, or she can step out and hit that three. Or Fee goes to set the screen. The defense is watching Fee go set the screen. Kayla McBride then sees the eyes are turned to Nafisa and she just cuts. So she rejects the screen and then she gets a wide open layup. Or Fee can, she reads that, she watches Kayla cut, and then she turns right around and gets a handoff from Jess. And so like it's the point series out of Princeton. It's called Away, but it's simplified. It's pass, screen, away, and you have, like I said, you had four options right there of just involving those two players. If the defense shifts over like they have against Minnesota a lot, then the player in the corner, Diamond Miller, right? She just cuts backdoor, gets a layup. All these different things. Sometimes simplicity is best, but if you're asking me, I guess it's no secret at this point. I have said many a time that Cheryl Reeve, like I watch a game she's coaching and I learn something every time, and that's basically everybody in the league. But with Cheryl, it's just like there's no doubt. I'm watching a Cheryl Reeve game. I'm stealing something from that game.
That's really quite awesome, and I'll take that for an answer. I think that's very fair to say, hey, everyone's running a different variation and stealing from one another as well. But I'll take the Cheryl Reeve answer as her Minnesota Lynx squad continues to jump up the standings to this point. But Evan, a couple more for you here, but I'm curious about your answer to this question because I'm not sure if you will or where you'll go with this, but I'm curious, the most successful style, if like you get to pick your personnel, but for the specific style that you would want to coach, what do you think is the most specific or most successful on offense and defense in terms of schematics?
So I would say in an ideal world, the level of connectedness, the Mystics and the Storm for the longest time played with.
Mm,
The Storm under Dan Hughes and everybody that followed after that versus Mike Tebow's Mystics. Like there was an interconnectedness with them. That's where I learned that like you could triple switch um after icing a ball screen. And like I don't want to get like too into the weeds on anything, but like I already mentioned what icing the ball screen is, right? But like the Mystics for the longest time like would ice the ball screen, and then after that, like, you know, in a situation where they would work it around. So like um I don't want to get too complicated actually, but basically what it is happens is they fill in for each other in a way that like you have to rep out a million times, or you have to have a level of like communication and connectedness that like you really work on every single day. So like the ability to like scram switch, which like
yes.
for your viewers who don't know, right, it's when a big switches onto a small, um and the small takes the big out. And then the offensive player, the offensive post player is like trying to seal in the low post a smaller player. A scram switch is when you scram or you force the smaller player out of there by taking a big player who's on the opposite side of the court or like closer to the big player and having them go there, and then having that player, the smaller player, like go out to the perimeter, right? The idea being that like you're slowing the big down, but you're also not giving away an easy pass because you have to throw a skip pass all the way across the court, which is for the most part a turnover, right? Or if it's not a turnover, it gives the defense a chance to um, adjust and recover. So a scram switch um, is similar to, like, if you can follow my logic here, the triple switch is very similar in that way, and that's where I learned it from.
Mm.
So like the specific style I would want is like you're just a high communication, high energy team. The ball is whipping around. If you have to slow it down, like here are the two or three things we're gonna run, and we're gonna get something good out of it. But you know, guards being able to screen for bigs, there's an interchangeability on both offense and defense that like I love to see. The best example of that most recently, um, because I watched them with great attention, is the Emma Misiman, um, Candace Parker, Chicago Sky. Um, so like they just did so many different things that like I didn't really know you could like do instinctively like that. Um, that I'm not saying that's the most successful style, but I'm saying the like if you were asking me to jump into any of the teams, my first answer would be um, not the Minnesota Lynx, because I know I'm not Shell Reeve. I can't do that. And I can't do most of the things that these coaches are doing. But I'm saying that like the built-in infrastructure that Chicago had with all those vets and stuff,
Yeah.
with Courtney Van, like at the point they won the championship, I would have said like if you told me Courtney Vandersloot, Kelly Copper, and Candace Parker, like it's a toss up who the Finals MVP is, because you have Allie Quigley like with her gravity, you have Azrae Stevens like doing all of this, and like a mini Candace Parker, right, and all that stuff. And it's just like eventually you run out of answers to the questions that these teams are posing. So like again, not a one for one answer maybe, but like that's what I would like to envision, like a style like I would want to be coaching.
Mm. Okay, okay. I'll take that. Unfortunately, I'm going to come through with a much more simplistic answer, just in terms of like a baseline coverage. I know I think an offense where it's just all out motion and passing. I'd prefer that, and unfortunately, I got to make this quicker than not. But more like I'd say less like the Washington Mystics of the last couple of years, and obviously no one. I for On the NBA side, you mentioned the scram switching. I'm a huge Celtics fan. The scram switching, they are all about that. But on the offensive side, this past year with Joe Mazzulla, a lot more read and react. We're seeing some of that from the Atlanta Dream, I think. But that offensively, I'm there, and then defensively, I don't know if it's the most successful, but I am in love with like a team that's able to switch, and I don't know if that's only because of what I've seen with the Celtics and small guards. But I love that style of defense in terms of having five players who can switch on to multiple positions. But no, Evan, thank you so much for coming on here. We've had a blast talking WNBA. I like I said during this podcast, I could listen to you talk basketball all day long. So thank you so much for joining and talking some WNBA on a pro basketball show.
Thank you for having me, man. As I continue to say, I tell this to everybody all the time, like share the game, share your knowledge, and like everyone will be all the better for it.
Yeah, we had a great time listening to you today. We'll have to have you on here again in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, make sure to follow and subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure to follow on Twitter and Instagram at APBShow, and follow me at the AC Willett 22. Thank you so much for tuning in for a pro basketball show. I am Andrew Willett.